Next, we will meet the grantees and hear about their experiences of working on the power tracker investigations. Kicking us off is Sichaba Muketi from Lesotho. Sichaba's investigation looked at a 2011 partnership between the Lesotho's government and a South African company to produce Africa's biggest wind energy project. Sichaba was not able to join us in person today, but he has shared a recording speaking about his investigation and providing some tips to fellow journalists.
Hi everyone, I'm Chama Mokheti. I'm a journalist and editor for the MNN Center for Investigative Journalism. I'm based in Lesotho. In this Power Tracker project, my role was to investigate a 15 billion US dollar wind farm project that was derailed by shady dealings between politicians, contractors, and investors. It was envisaged that the project would be operational by end of 2012. But to date, there are still no traces of the project in the country. So this raises the question of why the project disappeared from the government plans. To respond to this question, I simply followed the money. I had to follow the sources of this huge amount of 15 billion US dollars. Where was it supposed to come from in order to construct this milestone in Lesotho? So I had to first, of which would be my advice to my fellow journalists across the region, that when dealing with projects such as the non-renewable energies that are done by our countries in the region, it could be simple to untangle those investigations by simply following the money, understanding the project cycle, understanding its sources of financing, understanding the types of financing involved. For instance, I have realized that in my country, major projects that are done by our government are either financed through loans, grants, or equity. So, in the current case of the wind farm project that was to be constructed in the highlands in Mokotlo, I discovered that this was a combination of equity and loans, in that the government, together with a South African private company, that is Harrison and White Investment, they were supposed to contribute 20% of the total project financing, while the 80% remainder would be sourced from Chinese financial institutions. So I had to first dig into the financials. Having noted that the project was supposed to be um, financed by the government of Lesotho and a South African company and Chinese financial institutions, I had to do a background check on characters involved, were interested to finance the project. I discovered in my investigation that the Whites, the Harrison and White investments, did not have the funds, in that as early as 2013, the company had started proceedings to rescue its business because they didn't have funds. And the company was later in 2017 liquidated because of its lack of funds. And coming to the Chinese funding, I realized that the Harrison and White and Mingyang is another company based in China that was also supposed to provide turbines to this project. They had an agreement, a working agreement, that the Chinese funding would come to Lesotho under the arrangement that the Lesotho government, the Harrison and White, and the Chinese company itself that they had. But before even the project could take off, Miam pulled out of the project. With Ming Yang out of the picture after it withdrew from the project, it meant the project proponents could no longer source or could no longer secure funding that they were expecting from China. Also taking into consideration that Harrison and White was facing liquidation in South Africa because of its own financial problems. So it just disappeared from the project in Lesotho, hence its collapse. Data that was used in my investigation was mostly sourced from Global Energy Monitor. I was using the trackers that you'll find under the globalenergymonitor.org. These trackers, they vary with different sources of renewable energy. There are those for solar energy, there are those for wind energy, there are those for coal energy, there are those for hydro energy. So unfortunately for hydropower, the dataset will be available next year, second quarter of next year. So we'll be still waiting for it. But beyond that, there's also data where you can find some information about hydropower projects in the region from IRENA datasets.
Next is Deborah Matavu from Zimbabwe. Deborah investigated the Zimbabwean government's plan to roll out an incentive-based electric vehicle program across the country. She looked into the sustainability of the program, taking into account how much emissions these types of vehicles are emitting. Over to you, Deborah.
Investigation looked at transition to electric vehicles by the government on moving to electric vehicles. And at COP26 in 2021, last year, greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by the year 2030. And local environmentalists had already highlighted that the transport sector contributes 12% of greenhouse gas emissions. And of the 97% of the greenhouse gas emissions from the transport sector, 97% come from the fossil fuels in the transport sector. So the investigation basically tried to sought to look at how far government has gone in implementing the project. It also sought to find out about funds and how the project is going to be funded. The project, the investigation also looked at, sought to find out the challenges and the opportunities of the project and how it will impact how it will impact the communities in Zimbabwe. Some of the challenges that I faced during the investigation was getting information from the government, especially on issues to do with funding, issues to do with how how much the plans would require, where the funding is coming from. I couldn't get information from the government. So what I did was to try and interview as many government departments as possible, especially those working on the electric vehicle project. What I learned about data journalism is that a story that a data data journalist or the data journalism story is more comprehensive.
Next, we have Sharon Chipa from Botswana. Sharon's investigation focused on a biogas project in Botswana, which she'll describe in more detail. Take it away, Sharon.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Sharon Sipa. I am a multimedia journalist based in Gaborone, Botswana. So to start, I'll just give you a brief background on Botswana's energy transition. So basically, Botswana's power supply is heavily dependent or dominated by coal. Of current, our renewable energy contribution to the national grid is only 2.4%. And according to our nationally determined contributions, our NDCs, the government plans to have 15% of our energy supply coming from renewable energy by 2030. And also, according to the NDC, we are also working on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions by 15%, also by 2030. This is also just bearing in mind that Botswana's energy contribution or share of greenhouse gases in Africa. In Africa, is 3.8%, and our contribution to that 3.8% as a country is only 5%. So what exactly motivates my country to pursue the energy transition? What motivates my country is the fact that Botswana has, though we contribute little to greenhouse gas emissions in Africa and beyond, we are among the countries that are highly affected by the effects of climate change. Hence, our resolve to actually fight climate change as a country. So over the last 10 years, for example, we've had 7 drought years, and 3 of the other years were actually partial drought years. So you can see that we are struggling a lot, especially for a country that is semi-desert or semi-arid, which imports 80% of its foodstuffs from countries like South Africa. We are struggling a lot, especially in sectors such as the agricultural sector. We've been losing our cattle population. For a long time, we were known as a country whose cattle population is actually larger than its human population, but that is no longer true, as households now, especially in the traditional sector, have started leaving the traditional sector because cattle have been dying because of lack of water and lack of forage. So now we used to have at least like 2.5 million cattle within the traditional sector. Now we have something like 900 and something thousand, which is way less than we often did. So also just bear in mind that our agriculture sector in this country contributes to our GDP. So that sector has been highly affected. Droughts also have contributed to human and wildlife conflicts in our country, as you already know. We've had issues with elephants moving into territories where people stay, and there have been clashes where elephants were destroying water sources and they're eating crops because they were hungry, so they're moving into those habitations, and hence the human and wildlife conflicts. Of course, we've had water rationing when the Gaborone Dam dried up in 2014. In 2019, we had one of the major droughts where around the Okavango Delta, we had wildlife, we lost a lot of wildlife because the Okavango Delta almost dried up. So you can see that Botswana has been heavily affected, hence the motivation and the need to actually fight climate change, the need to actually transition. Having noted those, given that motivation, when it came to my role play within the Power Tracker opportunity, what I did basically, my investigation looked into Botswana's biogas project. This is one of the efforts that the government and its development stakeholders across the world has implemented in an effort to actually transition. So far, of course, we don't have much going on. Like I said, we only have 2.4% coming from renewable energy. So we only have one functional solar plant, which is 1.3 megawatts photovoltaic solar plant. So we don't really have much. Right now, the government is in a process of procuring many solar plants in an effort to actually transition by 2050. But as is, what I did was pursue or investigate Botswana's biogas project. This project promotes the production of energy among households, among farms, and among institutions that have access to agro waste. So right now, the energy that is being produced as a result of this project is being used for cooking, for cleaning, and for heating. This project it's actually called the Biogas Project. It was funded by the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, to a tune of $200,000 US, and it was also funded by contributions from the GEF, which is the Global Environment Facility, to a tune of $2,632,000 US. But at project design, note that the Botswana government had pledged or vowed to actually contribute at least 15 million US dollars plus or minus. So the total contribution from my government and the external international organizations that came on board would have been 19,316,000 US dollars. But at the end of the day, the Botswana government was not able to actually invest or contribute to the project. So the problem with that is that the project in itself was disadvantaged because it was, at the end of the day, not able to deliver on some of the objectives that it had sought to actually fulfill, which is to construct large and medium scale biogas digesters that would be connected to the national grid and increase the contribution of renewable energy to the country's energy mix. So that was a disadvantage. But despite the fact that the Botswana government was not able to actually contribute, the 2 million plus, which was contributed by the UNDP and the GEF, actually resulted in 231 digesters, which were constructed in the country. Of the 231 digesters, the beneficiaries, 122 were women. The 122 beneficiaries were women and the rest were men. And please note also that before this project was initiated in 2017, it started in 2017 in January and ended this year in January 2022. But before the project was actually implemented, the country only had 15 biogas digesters. And by the time it ended this year, it had contributed at least 231 biogas digesters in the country. But that was a far cry from what the government had actually, the development partners had actually wanted to achieve, because at project design, they had wanted to actually construct 1,000 biogas digesters, but they were not able to do so because of time constraints. So other than just the 231 digesters, another successful outcome which the project realized was the training of 70 biogas masons. These were people that were taught to actually construct biogas digesters in the country. And of the 70, 20 were female. So you can see that the project actually tried to reach some kind of gender balance. And yeah, so those are some of the outcomes that were realized. But because this project was not entirely free for the beneficiaries. The project implementers only paid for labor, and the beneficiaries had to actually invest money into purchasing materials that would allow them to have the technology installed in their spaces or homes. Because of that, uptake of the technology in itself was a little bit low, because some farmers or other households that wanted to actually have the technology could not afford it. But this is something that UNDP and its partners are going to look into as they scale up the project in the country, because this project was just a pilot project which was implemented only in the southern part of the country. So it still has to go to the west, to the north, and the east parts of the country. Having said that, to answer the question, what should a just transition look like in Southern Africa? Please note that this just transition, basically the whole thing of transitioning, of moving from fossil fuel energy to actually green energy, comes at a time when African countries have been trying to do all they can to actually develop, you know. So when we talk about the Industrial Revolution 4.0, when we talk about Society 5.0, these are things that cannot happen without energy, you know. But so what African countries have been told to do or motivated to do is actually to leapfrog from fossil fuels to green energy, lest they find themselves in the situation that the first world countries are in right now. But leapfrogging is not as easy as it sounds, because countries have to consider a lot of things, so that development in itself or Africa's social transformation is not affected. Over a month ago, I was at a panel discussion. I was part of a panel discussion on climate change, a pre-COP 27 climate change panel discussion. And there was this man there called Balesi Popolang. He works for the Department of Meteorological Services. He said this interesting statement that as Botswana, we cannot transition in the dark. And this is because as a government employee, they understand that the transition is going to be a little bit slow. Sometimes it's questionable, especially in Botswana, because not only are we still using coal, we are doing things that are questionable, like we're continuing to license coal mining at a time when we should actually be focusing on actually transitioning, you know. So Botswana on its own, our transition is our efforts are a bit questionable, but we are making a little bit of an effort. So because the reason why we cannot transition in the dark is because we cannot really just shut down everything, you know, because people still need to eat, you know, we still need electricity to light up, while the government is still procuring solar and other sources of renewable energy, or considering other sources of other renewable energy alternatives. People need to, like, life needs to continue. So basically, a just transition into the green economy should not cause harm to, for example, employees of the coal mines. If the governments decide to shut down the Murupule coal mine, where are these people going to go? And then it should not cause harm to communities, to countries or regions. And we're talking about Southern Africa here, so we have to consider that a just transition, therefore, should not cause any harm to anybody for it to actually be considered just. As in the biogas project, which I investigated, a just transition should be inclusive. We saw that in this project, the just transition was inclusive because it catered for farms, it catered for families, households, it catered for institutions. So many people were able to benefit, diverse sectors of the society were able to benefit, you know. So a just transition really should be inclusive and ensure that nobody is left behind. Having said that also, all right, thank you. Having said that, just my last point, a just transition should benefit the environment. We know that when it comes to development, what usually happens is that we by trying to solve one problem, we tend to create another problem. So when for a just transition to be just, we should be careful to ensure that our solutions do not affect the environment. And also, as in the Biogas project, a just transition should create employment and enable an environment where Africa's social transformation is possible. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and thank you for the opportunity.
Next up is Thabo Mulelekwa from South Africa. Thabo has looked at various renewable energy contracts concluded with companies by the South African government. He collected and analyzed data to determine how much money was distributed and what progress has been made so far. Over to you, Thabo.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Thabo Mulelekwa. I'm a health and environmental journalist in South Africa. So yeah, can you please go to the first slide? I did the investigation based on the investments of in the transition, like South Africa's energy transition. So I was looking more at the money and the status of actually these projects, the renewable energy projects in South Africa. So at the time I was writing the story, the government was busy with the projects that had actually passed B205. So what happened in that project, in that B205, the aim of that bid window, it was to actually secure a total of about, I think, 2,500 megawatts of renewable energy. That was going to be divided from both wind and solar farms. And there were 25 projects that were actually selected for the development of those solar farms and wind farms, with one of the companies scoring almost half of those projects. Like Mainstream Renewables got 12 of the projects, and this had actually made them one of the successful companies, like in the history of our renewable energy procurement. So, and the other thing is that all these 25 projects that were actually chosen, they are expected to start generating electricity in 2024. So we still have a bit of time to get there. So it's not like since they've been awarded this year, everything will just get going. So there are still processes that needs to go with that. Yeah, and what actually happened is that I got a lot of data from your DMRE, IRENA Global Atlas, and obviously I was going through the previous publications when I was doing my story, and also talking to different people, different experts who know more about the topic, who gave me information, or some of them had actually directed me to actually go and look for information elsewhere. So when I did this story, at the time I was publishing the story, nothing yet, as I mentioned, that nothing yet is being constructed. All we know now is that there are 25 projects that have been awarded, and they still need to actually develop those facilities. Those facilities are not developed yet. And lately, just last week, which is part of this story that I did, part of my investigation, we found out that also EDF Renewables, which is a long-time player in the field of renewable energy in South Africa, they also reached their financial close last week, and they are promising to actually start a bit early next year to build their facilities, and they will do that in the Northern Cape. So that's the status of our renewable projects for now. But the most important question is, how are these projects funded? Where does the money comes from? So when the government, I'll give you an example. For the 25 projects that I'm talking about, the government actually awarded 50 billion of those projects to these companies. Actually, so when we say the government announced that this project will amount to a total of about 50 billion rand, that doesn't mean that the government popped out any money to give to those companies. So the companies themselves, they go and look for funding. They go and look for money. Most of the money that is into this project come from the private sector. So that shows that these are actually loans that need to be repaid. It's not that just money that we get for. So that is what happens when we talk about these facilities. So what I was actually saying was that this issue, when we talk about these facilities that are going to be built in terms of us to transition to green energy, remember that they are in the communities that we live in. This brings us to the issue of saying, where we talk now about the grants that are being actually donated by our international partners, the European countries, and everybody. So now, remember, there was an 8.5 billion USD that was actually blessed at COP27. And there were a lot of questions, a lot of gray areas in the publications to say, where is this money and what is it going to do? So remember that when they announce, they don't deposit the money same time or in few months. No, the money we haven't received it yet, but what is it going to do? It looks that like this money is actually going to work more in the communities in terms of the just transition in the mining communities. But there is still a lot of questions around that, because when we're given that money, it's a pledge. Now it confuses people to say these countries are giving us this money in terms of grants, then we are happy because we are going to have more money to actually transition. But no, it's not like that. So at COP28, the president actually highlighted that the problem is that in that 8.5 billion that we got last year, 98% of that money is loans, and only about 2% of that is grants. And so now the South African government wants those European countries to actually restructure that funding. Let's have more grants in terms of loans. Why? It's because, remember, South Africa already carries a very sizable loan burden, which it has to service from its fiscus. So in terms of these kinds of pledges that come, will require more grant funding than loans. And the other thing, just before COP27 started, the government released the pathway plan for South Africa just transition. So what happens, we see in that plan that we need about 98 billion USD in order for us to transition. But this is money that we don't have, and we are waiting, we are hoping to get more grants instead of loans. We are hoping that in the term that we have planned for the next 5 years, this money can be actually available so that the country can be able to transition. And while at that, talking about the funds, the IPG, which is the International Partner Group, they have actually pledged an extra 10 billion US dollars to support South Africa's transition investment plan. So we got more on top of what we got last year, but still also it is not clear how much are loans in that money and how much is actually a grant. But what we know is that what does the government promise is that all this money, the one from COP26 and the one from COP27, would likely flow from next year in 2023. And yeah, we are looking at how will this be used, especially in the mining affected communities, recreation of jobs, compensation and repurposing of the coal-fired plants. So at the moment, this is where we are with the status of renewable energy in South Africa. Thank you so much.
Finally, Patizwe Zulu from Eswatini will wrap up this part of our discussion. Patizwe's investigation hones in on giant sugar mills that supply renewable energy to the national grid. He investigated how these biomass projects are funded, how much energy the companies have produced, and assessed the impact on nearby communities. Over to you, Patizwe.
Let me take this time to greet you all, my colleagues. My name is Patizwe Zulu. I'm a freelance journalist in Swaziland. My project was about cogeneration happening at Ubombo Sugar Company, which is part of the Ilovo Africa Group. So I was looking at the financing of the sugar cogeneration project at Ubombo. I also look at the environmental impacts the project is having on the carbon footprint and other environmental concerns. Then I also look at the impact the project is having on immediate communities. So in terms of financing, I discovered that these big corporations or multilateral organizations, they are quite secretive and they lack a lot of transparency, because Ubombo Sugar, eluded and evaded my investigation. They didn't want to be, I mean, they didn't cooperate. So, but almost 50% of the funding which they received from EU went to the cogeneration project. That was in 2008, 2009, because the cogeneration project was initially, was finally commissioned in 2011. So then on the issue of the impact on immediate communities, I discovered that there is a pending dispute between the communities or the farmers that supply the sugar. They supply the sugar cane to the company. The dispute revolves around the issue of ownership of Pakasi. They are saying if Ubombo Sugar now is using Pakasi to generate power, then they feel they are entitled to the profits. So it has not been resolved yet. It is still subject to consultation and discussion. Well, doing this project, I made some key findings. One of which I mentioned earlier on, that these guys are secretive. They don't want to release information easily. So another finding that I made was that the whole cogeneration technology, remains suspect, in a sense that it is not considered 100% clean energy. it is viewed as a bridging technology to clean or to green energy source. I also made the finding that the Ubombo sugar is not really transitioning. Not only Ubombo sugar, but even its counterparts, the Royal Eswatini Sugar Corporation, which also has its own cogeneration project. So these companies, they are not transitioning. I discovered that what they are doing for investing in cogeneration, number one is for purposes of diversification strategy. They want to diversify their investment in order to maximize profits. So they are after profits largely than transitioning as per subscribing to the climate change principles by COP or Paris Agreement. Also, they are cutting costs. That's what I discovered, because now they no longer supply they never get their electricity from Eswatini electricity company, since now there are, power is self-generated, so they are cutting costs. Well, I was following closely the COP 2017. The COP 27 in Egypt. What came out loud and clear for Africa, especially Southern Africa, was that transition is necessary for climate change as an adaptation and mitigation measures. In other words, the rolling out of electric cars, the manufacture of battery packs, and the use of solar and other off-grid solutions by wind has been largely encouraged, as opposed to cogeneration, which further casts a dark shadow on the future of cogeneration as a technology. What also came out from the COP27 is that hydropower, wind, and solar present opportunities for Southern Africa. In other words, there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of investment opportunities in these sectors, which means the transition from cogeneration is imperative. Hydropower and solar are, I could say, they are the last man standing. So, which emphasizes also that cogeneration doesn't have a long future. I also learned that South African power grid is heavily dominated by fossil fuel, particularly in South Africa, because we import almost 60% of our electricity comes from Eskom, which is largely coal. The cogeneration by Ubombo contributes only 3% to the grid. So South Africa provides us with with maximum electricity, which is from coal. So it makes sense to pressurize South Africa to transition, because if South Africa transition faster, then it will help smaller countries in Southern Africa, like Swaziland, to transition. I also came across the launch of the Africa Carbon Market Initiative, which was formally launched. Well, to me, I think it was a step towards the right direction on one hand, because it sort of incentivizes heavy emitters to sort of produce less or to emit less, or not to emit at all, because they will get incentives. On the other hand, activists are complaining that it's a sham. The whole
So you
issue
need
of
to
carbon
wrap up.
market, it's a sham. Okay, it's a sham because it's a delaying tactic by capital to keep on making money at the expense of doing or taking drastic steps in addressing climate change. I thank you.